What if the land beneath your feet could remember every drop of blood it's ever tasted? What if it needed more to keep growing? Clara thought she was just investigating dead soil in a forgotten town. But Redharrow isn't dead. It's waiting, and it remembers her name. This isn't just a horror story about curses and soil. It's about legacy, sacrifice, and a woman forced to choose between vanishing forever or feeding the land that already owns her. Part 1. The soil refuses the seed. I arrived in Redharrow just past dusk, with the sky stretched thin and grey like parchment about to tear. The road here twisted too tightly, coiling through fields that looked wrong, not empty, dead. Acres of soil, but no green, no weeds, no birdsong. Just dirt, cracked like something once living that had given up. It looked thirsty, but not in the way drought-stricken land does, more like something starved. The official paperwork said I was here on behalf of the State Agriculture Board. Soil restoration and fertility analysis, they'd called it. Just a quick report. A week, maybe 2. I'd expected poor drainage or pesticide, build-up, maybe tainted groundwater from nearby industry. Something I could test, chart, recommend a fix for. But Redharrow didn't feel like it was waiting to be saved. It felt like it had made peace with rot. The sign at the town entrance was crooked. Welcome to Redharrow, founded 1879, etched in worn wood. Someone had nailed dried flowers around it. Not in a cheerful civic pride sort of way, more like a grave. I drove through the main street slowly, no traffic, not even the comforting flicker of neon from a gas station. Just antique storefronts with darkened windows and dust so thick it looked like the buildings were holding their breath. Yet the sidewalks were swept clean. Someone was maintaining the silence. The innkeeper at the place I was booked into greeted me like he'd been waiting for me specifically. He smiled too long, eyes never quite meeting mine. Told me the room had a good view of the fields, like that was supposed to be a selling point. I nodded politely, signed the guest log, and tried not to flinch when I noticed the pen smelled like sulfur. He handed me a skeleton key, said, "Room 4, salt's under the bed if the wind changes," then turned and walked away like he hadn't just said something completely unhinged. I should have left then. The next morning, I started my inspections, took soil samples from 3 different fields, all the same. Texture was fine, pH slightly low, but not enough to explain what I was seeing or not seeing. There were no bugs in the dirt, not a single worm, beetle, or ant, just dry clumps that crumbled like old bones. When I leaned in close, the soil smelled like dust baked in sunlight. But underneath, I caught something metallic, something like blood left out too long. As I moved between sites, I noticed more of the same pattern. Fields bordered by salt lines. Deliberate ones, not industrial-grade application, but hand-poured. Circles, lines, some jagged, some perfectly shaped. One even formed a spiral that made my stomach twist just to look at it. At the general store, I asked a local farmer named Ellis if he knew anything about the salt. He gave me a grin that looked too wide for his narrow face. "Keeps the roots from remembering," he said. Then added, "Salt remembers what the blood forgets." I didn't ask him anything else. Later that afternoon, while walking the edge of a dried-up irrigation trench, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there she was, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7. She wore a patched green dress, her bare feet streaked with dirt. In her hand, she held a crumpled piece of paper. Without a word, she held it out to me. I unfolded it slowly. A child's drawing, done in thick, red crayon. It showed a field, black scribbles for the sky, and beneath it, twisting red roots. The roots weren't attached to any tree or plant. They seemed to move. They curled around stick figures, some upside down, some broken in half. At the bottom, she'd written a single word, "Feed." I looked up, but the girl was already walking away toward the woods. I called after her, but she didn't turn. Just vanished into the tree line like a deer that had never been there at all. That night, Back at the inn, I peeled off my boots and froze. They were filled with salt, not spilled on them. In them, packed into the toes, fine, grainy crystals that gleamed faintly in the lamplight. I didn't remember seeing it earlier. I hadn't stepped in anything. But there it was, cool and dry and deliberate. When I called the innkeeper, he didn't seem surprised. He just said, "It's a kindness. Keeps the dreams out." I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of standing in a cornfield with no corn, just stalks of bones stretching up toward a sky that dripped rust. Something beneath my feet moved, shifting just under the surface. It whispered without words, and I knew it wanted me to dig, to kneel, to plant something. I woke up before I could. This morning, I went back to the first field I'd surveyed, determined to run a deeper analysis. I took a core sample, 3 feet down. The soil resisted more than it should have, like digging into something fibrous. Then my tool hit something hard, not rock. I knelt, brushing the soil aside by hand. What I uncovered didn't make sense. A charred ring in the earth, wide as a car, perfectly circular. The soil around it was blackened, laced with what looked like ash and crystallized salt. The pattern wasn't random. It had shape, form, intention. A sigil, part agricultural symbol, part something older, something wrong. And just beneath the surface, tangled in the roots around the edges, were bones, small, human, and snapped. I stared at the circle until the wind changed direction and brought with it the scent of something sweet and rotting. The earth beneath Redharrow didn't forget. It remembers every seed, every scream, every root fed with more than water. I was sent here to restore the soil, but this land doesn't want to be restored. It wants to be fed. Part 2. We till what we're given. I spent the next morning trying to make sense of what I'd found. Bones buried under a blackened sigil, salt crusted into the dirt like ritual seasoning. I documented everything, photographed every angle. But the moment I brought it up to the locals, the town changed. Not openly, not with threats, with silence. I started at the post office thinking I could chat with whoever ran it. A woman in her late 50s sat behind the counter, sorting a stack of yellowed letters. She barely looked up when I said hello, just asked if I was sending or receiving. When I told her I was doing agricultural work, her hand froze mid-sort. Then she smiled a tight, tired smile and said, "Soil's stubborn is all. Doesn't like strangers digging." I asked her about the field, about the circle. She blinked slowly, then whispered, "We till what we're given." Then she closed the window hatch and didn't speak again. Down the street, I tried the diner, a place called Harvest Moon Cafe. The name alone made my stomach turn. Inside, it was mostly empty, just a man in overalls sipping coffee and a waitress, with wrists too thin and eyes too wide. I ordered black coffee and asked if the town had experienced any unusual crop failures in the past. The waitress said nothing. The man, though, he leaned forward and said, "You ever heard of the Feast of Soil?" I said no. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "It's not something we talk about with Outlanders. But back when I was a boy, Redharrow had children, dozens of them, classrooms full. Now? You seen any? Besides the one who gave you that drawing?" He sipped his coffee again and added, "Feast comes when the ground is hungry, and the ground. He's always been a glutton." I asked him what that meant. He only said, "Stay indoors after dark. The roots remember feet." And then he got up and left his mug half full on the table. I went to the library after that, not a large building, 1 floor, half lit, humid with mildew and neglect. The librarian was an old man with a milky eye and fingers that drummed in, a slow, syncopated rhythm against the desk. I asked for historical records on Redharrow's agricultural history. He looked at me without blinking and said, "Not much left that didn't rot." Still, he pointed me toward a back room. The smell back there was worse. Damp paper and old sweat. I combed through a few stacks, mostly unreadable, but on the bottom shelf, I found a farming ledger with a cracked leather cover and handwritten entries spanning nearly a century. Inside were records of planting times, harvest yields, and rituals, literal ones. Scrawled between the rows of barley and wheat data were notations like 1 goat, 1 prayer, 1 cut at the roots. Circle drawn with salt and blood before planting. Mother Pike's blessing given, no more hands lost this season. And then a single entry, dated in faded ink. Feast denied. Fields took John's boy instead. I sat in that room with the pages open in front of me, cold sweat forming down my back. The air felt too still, like the room was listening. I copied what I could, folded the pages into my notebook. When I left, the librarian watched me go with that same twitching rhythm in his fingers, like he was tapping out a countdown. I returned to the inn before sunset. The sky was changing fast. Clouds, sinking low, pressed flat like a hand trying to smother the sky. The light turned a strange shade of orange-grey, like bruised fruit. A murder of crows sat on the power lines as I passed, all facing the same direction. Dinner was quiet. No other guests. The innkeeper had left a bowl of stew at my door with no note, no knock. I didn't eat it. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and turned on every light in the room. My nerves were raw, my thoughts spinning around the same phrases. We till what we're given. Feast of soil. The roots remember feet. I sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through the notes, trying to convince myself this was some eccentric local tradition, superstition, nothing more. Then came the tapping. 3 short knocks against the window glass, not hard, deliberate. I froze. The window overlooked the side yard, no tree nearby, no branches that could reach it. The tapping came again. I crept toward the window and pulled the curtain aside. No one there, but the ground outside was different. The grass had been scraped away in a perfect square beneath the window, exposing freshly turned dirt. A shovel leaned against the siding. There were footprints in the soil, bare, small, like a child's. The tap came again, but this time from the opposite side of the room. I spun around. Nothing, but the room felt colder now, like something had opened, not a window, not a door, something else. I slept with the lights on, or tried to, but when sleep finally came, it wasn't restful. In the dream, I was standing in the field again, the same blackened circle from before, but this time it wasn't empty. Roots pushed through the soil in every direction, twitching like veins, slithering like eels. They wrapped around my legs, tight, pulled. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The roots forced their way into my mouth, my ears, my nose, not strangling, whispering, and the voice I heard wasn't unfamiliar. It was my own. Dozens of me, hundreds, saying, "We till what we're given, and we give what we owe." When I woke, my legs were tangled in the bedsheets, my throat was raw, and my feet were streaked with dirt, soil. In the bed, as if I'd been outside, or something had brought the outside in, and I was starting to understand something awful. Redharrow isn't suffering from a curse, it's upholding one. Part 3. The harvest that took them. By the 3rd day, I had stopped pretending this was a normal investigation. The reports I was supposed to file sat untouched in my suitcase, already irrelevant. The soil here didn't want to be tested, it wanted to be listened to, and I was beginning to hear it. The whispers hadn't stopped since the dream. Not loud, not constant, just faint enough to question if they were real, like an echo you could almost chase, but never quite catch. I woke to find my fingernails packed with dirt, my hands dry, cracked like old bark. They bled when I flexed them. The skin flaked off in brittle curls, and the worst part, I hadn't touched soil since yesterday. Not with my bare hands, but the land had touched me. I needed answers. real ones. So I went back out, this time following a hunch, to a southern stretch of farmland, long abandoned, bordered by rusted wire and a crooked wooden fence someone had tried to mend with bones. Actual bones, bleached white and bound with twine. There, the ground was different again. The top layer had clearly been salted, but not recently. The salt had settled into the earth in uneven patches, like it had been poured in panic. And when I knelt to examine the soil, I noticed something stranger. The layer beneath had been disturbed, not turned over for planting. Buried, covered in haste. I took my trowel and began to dig. The soil fought me every inch, like I was pulling apart scabs the earth was trying to heal. About 2 feet down, the trowel caught on something solid. Not stone. Wood. I cleared around it and uncovered a slatted lid, part of what looked like a broken box, nailed shut from the outside. Something meant to stay down. I pried it open with shaking hands. Inside was rot, pieces of cloth, broken pottery, a rusted garden tool, and a child's shoe. And beneath that, black hair, clumped, matted, human. It wasn't a burial, it was a disposal, and someone had tried to erase it with salt, but they hadn't buried it deep enough. Back in town, I went to the library again, this time for town records. I wanted to see what happened on that land, when it was last used, who had owned it. The records from 1921 were missing. Gone. Not misfiled, not misplaced, ripped out. The pages jumped from 1920 to 1922, like nothing had happened in between. But the local newspaper, the Redharrow Herald, had a bound volume of clippings. I flipped through it until I found what I wasn't supposed to. A headline, 15 taken in the harvest, grave sealed, soil salted, feast denied. No article, just that. A black and white photo of townsfolk gathered in front of the fields, heads down. One man stood apart. His eyes were scratched out in the print. Deliberately, I asked the librarian about the missing records. He just muttered, "Roots grow through memory. Best to cut where they can't reach." I left and went looking for someone, anyone, who would give me something that made sense. That's when I met Marnie. I hadn't noticed her before. Maybe she hadn't been there. Maybe she'd been waiting. She sat on the edge of a dry fountain near the church, skin like baked leather, and eyes that looked too young for her age. Like something had preserved her. When I asked about the salted land, she looked me over and said, "They salted the wrong grave, dear." I asked what that meant. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't the ground that took them. It was what they put in the ground. It never asked for blood, but once it tasted it, it remembered. I told her I thought the land was cursed. She shook her head. Curses are made by people. This isn't a curse. This is consequence. I pressed her. Who were they? Why salt the land? Why now? She just whispered, "The roots never sleep. They keep growing even when you cut the stem. That's how it survives. That's how it learns." Then she touched my hand, gently, and winced. "You're drying out," she said softly. "It's taking from you, like it did the others." I left her there, staring into the fountain's cracked basin like it could show her the past. Back at the inn, my room smelled different. Not bad, just wrong. Like iron, like old rain, like soil turned in the dark. I checked the floorboards. Nothing. I pulled back the sheets. Nothing. But under the bed, something caught my eye. Half buried in the salt the innkeeper had once called a kindness. It was wrapped in burlap. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. The cloth was stiff with something dark. Blood, dried and soaked through. I unfolded it. Inside was a totem. Rough, primitive, but unmistakably carved from human bone. Tiny ridges shaped like ribs along the spine. Hollow eyes, jaw twisted in a grin that wasn't right. The whole thing felt warm in my hands. Alive, and carved into the base, Etched so deep the bone had split was a name, my name, Clara Harrow. I dropped it, stepped back, salt scattered underfoot like glass shards. How long had this been beneath me? Who put it there? And how did it already know who I was? The land doesn't forget. It remembers every footprint, every offering, every name. I wasn't here to study it. I was here because it called me, and now it's waiting. Part 4. Salt keeps it sleeping. I confronted the town council the next morning. 3 men and 2 women sat in that wood-paneled chamber like statues made of ash. Their smiles were brittle, their words too rehearsed, and behind their eyes, nothing. Just soil and secrets. I told them what I'd found, about the buried box, the bone totem with my name, the missing records. I demanded to know what happened in 1921. One of them, a man named Delman, tilted his head and said, "We're grateful for your service, Miss Harrow, but your time here is almost up. No need to keep digging." The others nodded in eerie synchronization. I told them I wasn't asking. I was reporting a systemic failure, a cover-up, a public safety hazard. The oldest councilwoman leaned forward and said too softly, "Not everything is meant to grow." I left, furious, shaken. The walls of that room felt like they'd narrowed as I stood there, like they were breathing, packed. I threw everything into my car. Notes, samples, voice recorder, what little food I had left, and I drove. No plan, no route, just out. The road unspooled ahead of me, gravel spitting beneath the tires, trees pressed close on either side. My GPS glitched, spun the map in circles, then died. No signal, no satellite, and then I saw the sign. "Welcome to Redharrow. Population 381. I blinked, slowed down. That was the same sign I'd passed on my way in, but I'd driven away from town, not toward it. I turned around. 20 minutes later, I passed the sign again. I tried every direction. Left, right, back roads, even footpaths. Each time I ended up where I started. The town didn't want me to leave. And worse, the longer I stayed on the roads, the more the air began to change. It smelled wet. Not like rain, like blood, iron and salt and something else. Wild garlic, not fresh, wilting, dying. The scent clung to my clothes, soaked into the upholstery of my car. I rolled the windows down to breathe, but the air outside was heavier, thicker, like trying to inhale, through cotton. I stopped at the town hall, desperate, furious, afraid. I stormed through its echoing corridors, past dusty portraits and ancient furniture, and found a door I hadn't noticed before, half rotted, sealed with twine and dried sprigs of garlic. I broke through. It led to stairs, down into the dark. Didn't even hesitate. At the bottom was a stone corridor, slick with mildew. I followed it by flashlight. Walls carved with sigils, roots jutting from cracks like fingers. The deeper I went, the louder it got. Not voices, breathing. I came out into a hidden church, a chapel made of earth. No pews, no stained glass. Just a dirt floor, crumbling walls, and an altar, an actual mound of compacted soil, like a grave waiting to be opened. Atop it were offerings, bundles of hair, small teeth, human, knotted roots soaked in something dark. The air buzzed with something low and guttural, a voice, not mine, not human, a sermon whispered to no one, or maybe to the ground. I backed away slowly. Every part of me screamed to run, but the floor felt spongy, alive. Each step was harder than the last, like walking through drying cement. At the exit, I found her, Marnie, standing in the corridor like she'd been waiting again. She looked tired, not scared, not angry, just resigned. She didn't ask what I saw. She knew. She only said, Every 33 years, the ground stops taking. I asked what she meant. She said, "It hungers. It remembers what it was given. And if we don't feed it, it takes who it wants." I asked, "Feed it what?" Her voice cracked. "What it lost." Then she looked at me, truly looked at me, and whispered, "That's why you're here." I left her there and ran. I don't remember how I got back to the inn. I don't remember unlocking the door, only the sudden quiet when I stepped inside, like the house was holding its breath. I turned on the lights. The floor was clean, the bed was made, but something felt placed, arranged. I looked down. Salt, poured in a perfect circle around the bed. Thin, unbroken, deliberate. And when I lifted my hands, soil, packed under every nail, embedded into the skin. My palms were cracked, open, bleeding, like I'd been digging again. Only I don't remember it. I stared at those shaking, filthy hands, and the thought hit me. What if I hadn't left the chapel? What if something followed me back? Or worse, what if I never came back at all? Just another offering returned to the room, wrapped in salt, waiting for the feast. Part 5. The Feast of Soil. There's a lie Redharrow tells itself once a year. They call it Founder's Day. Banners of stitched wheat hang limp from the eaves. Children parade with masks of bark and bone. A fiddler plays a tune no one taught, hymn. There's pie, laughter, cider. The whole town dressed in celebration, but it feels like a funeral where the corpse hasn't been announced yet. They were preparing a ritual, and I was the guest of honor. I tried to act normal, blend in. But the eyes on me weren't the same as before. The politeness had curdled into quiet hunger. I saw it in the way Mrs. Harps held her baby tighter when I walked by, in the way the butcher's knife hovered over nothing when I passed his shop, in the way they smiled at me, like they already knew what I was. I needed answers. No more legends, no more whispers. I broke into the doctor's office. He wasn't there. The door was locked, but not hard to force. Inside, the lights were off. Cabinets labeled by initials, shelves lined with jars of grey fluid and clotted samples, a drawer marked Harrow C. I opened it. Inside were blood vials, 6 of them, dated over the last 2 weeks. I hadn't given blood. Photos of me, sleeping, walking through town, standing at the edge of the salted field. One showed me staring at something that wasn't in frame, but my mouth was open like I was screaming. Another showed my back, only it wasn't quite my back. It was branded with a faint symbol. The same sigil from the crop circle. Beneath the folder was an old, crumbling envelope, sealed with wax. Inside, a birth certificate. Not mine. A woman named Evelyn Harrow, born 1893. Disappeared in 1921. Listed as absconded from duty. Next to it, a photo, grainy, weathered. The woman in the picture looked exactly like me, not similar, identical. I ran my thumb over her face. The eyes, the hairline, the expression like she already knew how it would end. A handwritten note was clipped to it. The blood returns every third turning. The soil keeps the shape. The feast must remember its last. My great-grandmother. The last sacrifice. And now, me. I was never a stranger to Redharrow. I was sent back. No, not sent. Summoned. I left the office in a daze. The air outside felt thicker, like the oxygen had been cut with something old and patient. The whole town was heading to the hall. Founder's Day dinner. Beneath it, the altar. I followed behind them, but peeled off when no one looked. Found the rotting stairwell, the dirt tunnel. The breathing walls, it was waiting. That same mound of packed soil, roots like veins twisting beneath the surface, offerings piled high, a child's tooth, a ribbon of scalp, a chicken heart still twitching. I brought gasoline, matches. If I couldn't leave Redharrow, I'd make sure this place didn't stand. I poured the fuel over the altar, let it soak through the hair and bones. Struck the match. Flame caught fast. For a moment, I thought it might work. Then, it screamed. Not the fire, the altar. It hissed, cracked, split open like skin, bleeding thick, dark fluid. Blood, not fresh, ancient, coagulated in the shape of something still alive. The flame died in seconds, snuffed out by the altar's breath. The blood soaked into the dirt, and I swear I saw something move beneath it. A spine, a rib cage, a curled thing with a mouth made of roots and an eye that opened without blinking. I ran out of the tunnel, out into the streets, back to my room where I slammed the door and bolted it shut. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the keys twice. I turned off every light, sat in the dark and listened. First, it was silence, then footsteps, soft, slow, hundreds of them. I peeked through the blinds. The entire town was there, lined up along the street, holding candles that smoked green. Their faces were blank, not angry, not joyful, just ready. Their hands coated in soil. Their mouths moved in sync, but I couldn't hear them. Not until I opened the window. Then the chant came, low and thick. She returns. She feeds. We grow. Over and over, as one voice. She returns. She feeds. We grow. I backed away from the window. My feet left dry prints in the floor's layer of dust, but the chant didn't stop, and I knew what they meant. It wasn't about Evelyn Harrow anymore. The ground had tasted her once, and now it wanted more. It wanted me. Part 6. Blood on the Roots. I didn't sleep. Not after the chanting stopped. Not after the lights in the street winked out one by one. I waited in the dark, clutching the last sharp thing I could find. An old pair of rusted shears from the tool shed behind the inn. My breath came shallow. My hands smelled of iron and ash. And just before dawn broke, I heard them again. Footsteps. Dozens of them. This time, no chanting, just movement. Steady, deliberate. I didn't wait for the door to splinter. I ran. Down the back stairwell, across the gravel lot, into the fields. The ground was slick beneath me, heavy with dew, or maybe something thicker. I didn't look. I just ran, but the land wasn't passive anymore. It pulsed, not a tremor, not wind. A heartbeat. Under the dirt. Under me. And every time it beat, something pushed just beneath the surface. Like a face, pressed against a curtain, waiting to be born. I could hear them behind me. The townsfolk, not running, just walking. Silent. Their hands coated in salt and soil. Some of them carried branches, bundles of garlic, broken relics from the chapel. They didn't shout. They didn't plead. They just came, like harvesters, and I was the crop. I aimed for the only thing still untouched by their rot, the lone tree at the valley's center. I'd seen it from a distance. A skeletal thing, blackened with age, its limbs clawing the sky like it was begging to be pulled free. Everything around it had died, but the tree stood tall, wounded, but eternal. The moment I stepped into its shadow, the world changed. The air thickened. The sound vanished. The town disappeared behind me, swallowed by distance or something else. Approached the tree, its bark wept sap so dark it looked like old blood. The roots, massive and gnarled, curled from the earth like ribs from a grave. At the base of the trunk, something breathed. Not the wind, not an animal, something old. I reached out, and Marnie was there. She didn't walk, she didn't emerge. She was, like she'd always been part of it. Her eyes were wrong, hollow, black, not with rot, but with knowing. Her hands clutched a satchel, red velvet, stained and worn thin. "I didn't want it to be you," she said. "But it always is. One of the blood, one of the line." She opened the satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She held it like it was sacred or cursed. She unwrapped it. A jawbone, human, carved with runes, still stained with old blood. "Your great-grandmother tried to run too," Marnie said. She screamed all the way down. I asked her what she wanted. Her answer, "The land needs memory." I shook my head, told her I'd never give them anything. She only smiled. Not cruel, not victorious, just sad. "You already have." She nodded at the roots. They were moving toward me. One peeled upward, cracked open like a mouth. Inside, teeth. Old, crumbling, human. Another pulsed with something that looked like veins, and from the roots came sound. Not growling, not the wind. Whispers. 100 voices, all mine, speaking back to me. Every doubt I'd ever held, every secret I thought buried. It fed on me, on the memory of me. And still, Marnie waited. She held out the jawbone. "A choice," she said. "Take the mark willingly. Be remembered. Be honored. Be rooted. Or resist. Be swallowed. Be forgotten." The tree moaned behind her, the soil beneath me cracked, and I realized that's what the land feared most. Not death, oblivion. It grew only from what it remembered. Names, blood, sacrifice. If I chose, I could remain in Redharrow. I would become part of it. Not alive, not dead, but remembered, whispered about, like Evelyn, like the others. If I refused, there would be no scream, no grave, just dirt. I looked at the shears in my hand. They felt meaningless now. I looked at the tree, and then I screamed. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't surrender. It was everything. The sound split the air like lightning. The roots surged. Marnie vanished. The sky shrank, and the soil opened its mouth and took me. The crops sprouted weeks later. Corn, thick, golden, untouched by blight. Wheat too. Rows of it, swaying like prayer. Redharrow celebrated. Founders' Day came early. They didn't talk about me, not aloud, but the soil remembered. The house where I stayed was sold. A new family moved in. Nice people. Quiet. There. Daughter, maybe 6, liked to draw in chalk on the sidewalk. Her favorite picture, a tree with a face and blood on the roots. If Redharrow unsettled you, good. There are more towns like it. More stories buried beneath salt and silence, waiting to be uncovered. So if you're brave enough to keep digging, hit like, share this video with someone who sleeps too peacefully, and subscribe to Haunted Echoes for more horror that sticks with you long after the screen goes dark. And remember, some roots go deeper than you think.